When J.D. Vance took to the stage at the Munich Security Conference, the audience of politicians, military leaders, dignitaries from across Europe did not know what was coming. My name's Tom Harwood and this is GBN Originals. The US Vice President has thrown a blast into the Munich Security Conference, a conference that thought it would be talking about Ukraine, about European external security. Now instead, the conversation turns to internal security. The Vice President J.D. Vance went up to that lectern and initially played out some niceties towards his friends. He talked about his meeting with the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, but the speech quickly turned. Indeed, the applause from those gathered became less and less, and in many ways, that's precisely what the Vice President wanted to hear. Why? Because he upended expectations. He turned the dial. He moved the conversation away from talking about countries like Russia or China, like North Korea or Iran, and instead spoke of policy in countries like Britain, Germany, and Sweden. Why? Because he said security, like the security being discussed at the Munich Security Conference, as it has been discussed at the Munich Security Conference each and every year since this conference began in the wake of the Second World War, should also focus on security at home as well as security abroad. Not just who are you fighting, but what are you fighting for? And that question led to the two main themes of his speech: free speech and migration. Indeed, all feeding through to a broader question of democracy, of whether or not European leaders will trust their people, of whether or not when the people speak, they will be listened to. J.D. Vance referenced a former European commissioner, one of the most powerful bureaucrats that walked the halls of Strasbourg and Brussels, when he referenced that individual talking about the possibility of cancelling German elections if the elections go the wrong way, in his view. Now, of course, that sounds like an anathema to the eyes and ears of anyone who believes in an open, free and democratic society, and yet a former European commissioner uttered those words. But the Vice President's speech was littered with examples like that. Examples of European politicians, of European bureaucrats and leaders talking about things that sound deeply peculiar to American ears. In many ways, this was a speech not just for those in the hall, but for a domestic audience too.
Us blokes hate talking about a little thinning up top, and many of us settle with that balding look, but that wasn't for me, and that's why I went to Elite Hair, the world's leading hair loss clinic, and now I've had over 4,000 new hairs added to this barnet, and very soon I'm going to be rocking some brand new flowing locks, and you can too. So how does it work? Step 1, I sent the team a set of photos of my head. Step 2, I then spoke to one of the Elite Hair staff who looked through my photo submissions and worked out a treatment plan for me. Step 3, Elite Hair then organised accommodation and the treatment. I was at their state-of-the-art treatment centre in Istanbul, and their incredibly kind staff took me through the process, and before I knew it, I was in surgery. Elite Hair and their leading medical experts have specialised in pain-free treatments using the sleep deep method, and they really mean that. I felt incredibly relaxed the whole time, and I haven't felt any pain since. Check out Elite Hair using the link in the description. When you do, Elite Hair will provide you with a free personalised hair analysis. Then you'll join over 100,000 happy patients. Hit that link and start your hair growth journey like I did today.
It spoke of the free speech rights of those in Europe that seem to, well, not really exist anymore. The right of someone to pray silently in their head within a certain vicinity of an abortion clinic, well, that's resulted in arrests and legal sanctions in the UK. J.D. Vance spoke of the possibility of people being criminalised for prayer in their own homes in certain circumstances in Scotland, although it does seem to be there is some debate over the veracity of that claim. It all pertains to those wider exclusion zones around abortion clinics and whether or not someone's home will fall within them. I think that perhaps the Vice President might have gone a bit far on that one. Where he didn't go far, though, what is pertinently true is that we have seen instances, both in Sweden and in Britain, where an individual has burned a Quran and ended up being arrested Yes, it's a touchy subject to touch upon, but in the United States, of course, you wouldn't dream of being arrested for someone burning some of their private property. Indeed, there was a case that was the real test of this back in the 1990s in Texas. There were members of the local legislature and there were lawyers trying to criminalise an individual for burning an American flag. There was a big row that led right up to the US Supreme Court. And what did the US Supreme Court decide? It decided that an American has the right to burn an American flag. And in some ways, what a symbol that is of American free speech rights. Even an act that most people would look down upon as detestable. An act that would seem to run against the spirit of the United States of America, protected by the American Constitution, by that First Amendment that guarantees your free speech rights. Well, of course, to people who've grown up in American culture, who have seen laws like that protect heinous acts, but speech acts, well, when they look across to Europe and see people being criminalised for similar things, that seems to be absolutely anathema to the fundamental values of a free society. Just as in the United States of America, you should be allowed to burn an American flag, or any other flag for that matter. You should be allowed under the law to burn any book in your possession, of course. Now, all of these are horrible things to do, but the question is the sanction a moral one or a legal one? And clearly, under the terms of the United States Constitution, the sanction cannot be legal. However, in Britain, in Sweden, right across Europe, the sanction is legal. If you own a book and you choose to burn that book, whatever that book is, well, clearly, in so many cases, the legal systems of these countries think more about who might be offended by an action rather than the right of a sovereign individual to do whatever he wants with his own property. There's a clash of values here. There's a clash of interpretations of what it means to live in a democracy. And perhaps that gulf is growing between the United States and the European Union and all the other countries that fit across that gap of the Atlantic Sea. Perhaps there is something deep going on here, because it doesn't just stretch to speech rights. J.D. Vance also spoke, of course, about migration. He was speaking in a city that had just seen a horrific attack. An Afghan asylum seeker of mid-20s age ramming a car into a group of people on the side of the main street in Munich. It's something that, for an American vice president to speak about, will have felt incredibly close to home. We'll remember the Al-Qaeda terrorist who did precisely the same in New Orleans on New Year's night. I remember reporting about it for the whole of New Year's Day here on GB News. We had a plan for a show that was about joy and light and a new year and everything going on in the world, and instead we spent the entire thing talking about the horrific tragedy that occurred in the United States on that night. Of course, a tragedy that killed a Brit too, simply trying to celebrate the new year. But the thing is, the sad thing about these tragedies is that there are so many of them now. Whether it's Munich, whether it's New Orleans, whether it's so many other places. I mean, it seems that we've had year after year, almost month after month. Pick a city in the UK, look at London, look at any city in France, look at many cities in Germany. How many have suffered these cars and vans ploughing into people on the street, ploughing into people partying, ploughing into Christmas markets, again and again? And it does seem that there is a recurring pattern with the individuals behind these acts. Perhaps for the first time, the US Vice President spelled it out in black and white. There does seem to be a problem of radical Islamism across the European Union, across Britain, and indeed, to some extent, across America too. And the question is, have the people of any of these countries ever been consulted, ever been asked about the sheer scale of demographic change that we've seen in recent years. It's a question that J.D. Vance posed to those in the room, those politicians and leaders of all of those countries. It made this speech something entirely unexpected at the Munich Security Conference, something that was unexpected for those that were listening to it. But perhaps unexpected was just what the room needed to hear. It posed some deep questions. Some many people in this country will agree with. Some many people in this country will disagree with. But my goodness me, hasn't it started a conversation? And that conversation will be followed closely here on the GBN Originals YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe for, frankly, all of the fallout to a speech that blew the roof off the Munich Security Conference.